Hello everyone. In this video we're picking up from chapter 16 of Isaiah, which is a continuation of the oracle on Moab that started in chapter 15 of Isaiah. All right, let's dive in. Chapter 16, verse 1. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah by way of the desert, to the mount of the daughter of Zion. Like fleeing birds, like a scattered nest, so are the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon. Pause. What's happening here? It's a very interesting shift. If you read these two chapters in one flow, chapter 15, we were talking about the destruction of Moab that's coming and the Lord's grief over it, right? That's how we ended the previous chapter. And in chapter 16, verse 1, we have a change of scene. We are now zooming in to the cabinet of Moab, who is sending a messenger to Jerusalem. And what do I mean by this? Let's look at the text carefully. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah by way of the desert to the mount of the daughter of Zion. Lambs are the most common, the standard Moabite tribute, and we see this even in the Bible, like 2 Kings 3, where Moabites, when they send tribute, it's usually the lamb. Okay, that's the typical tribute that diplomats would carry with them to go to another country. So they're sending the lamb. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah. Where is Selah? Selah literally means rock, and it has been traditionally associated with Petra in Jordan. If you guys been to Petra in Jordan, you will see that the whole city is carved out of a stone. It's carved into the stone. It's built on top of a stone. Like it's a rocky region. And so Selah, which means rock, scholars have often identified this with Petra. Petra is southeast from the Dead Sea, so it's way down there. And it's actually in the land of Edom. Okay, Moab and Edom, their border kind of changes over time, but at this time it was in the land of Edom. So the Moabites apparently have fled to the Edomite territory, seeking refuge from the Assyrians who are coming up from the north. Okay, so the cabinet of Moab is having a meeting in Selah, saying, hey, from Selah, let us send some lamb to the mount of the daughter of Zion, which is Jerusalem. Let's send some lamb and some tribute to the king of Judah. Why? Because the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon, they're scared. So the country is in ruins, they're fleeing. The daughters of Moab are struggling, they're scattered. Okay? So they need some help from Judah. So they are sending lamb and diplomat messengers to Judah seeking for help. And we see what the messengers will say to the Judahite king in verse 3. Give counsel, grant justice, make your shade like night at the height of noon. Shelter the outcasts. Do not reveal the fugitive. Let the outcasts of Moab sojourn among you. Be a shelter to them from the destroyer. Pause. So these are the words of the messengers of Moab that are supposed to say to the Judahite king. Long story short, help us out. Make your shade like night. Okay? Be a shelter to them from the destroyer. They're seeking shelter in Selah. They're asking for Judah if they could have refugees be sent them, or if they could go there to find refuge because of the Assyrians who are destroying the Moabite territory. Verse 4b, we have a shift of speaker. What I mean by this, I will explain after I read, okay? Verse 4b. 4b is the second half of verse 4. When the oppressor is no more, and destruction has ceased, and he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land, then a throne will be established in steadfast love, and on it will sit in faithfulness in the tent of David, one who judges and seeks justice and is swift to do righteousness. Okay, this part has created a lot of discussion in determining who the speaker is. And it's a very interesting discussion, but I feel like I'm not sure if I want to go through all the discussion, all the arguments and the counter arguments of each position. I'm just going to offer you my view, okay? Feel free to disagree. That's quite all right. Scholars disagree. Scholars who love God, who love Jesus disagree, and we still can be together, okay? But I'm going to offer you my interpretation of these two verses. 4b and 5 are the reply of the Judahite government to the messengers sent by Moab. So the Moabite messenger said, hey, please help us find refuge in you. And the Judahite king says, when the oppressor is no more, destruction has ceased, he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land, then a throne will be established in steadfast love. So it's talking about the certainty of the end to this disaster. Okay? It's talking about the certainty of the end of this guy who's trampling all the land. And then a throne will be established in steadfast love. On it will sit in faithfulness in the tent of David, one who judges and seeks justice and is swift to do righteousness. So Judah is offering a shelter of Zion, but under the messianic guy who's gonna come. Long story short. Okay? These guys who are destroying you guys are gonna be also destroyed. They're gonna be kicked out. And then a throne will be established. And then the description of it is clearly messianic. Okay? Who seeks to do justice and who judges, is swift to do righteousness. So this is how I understand it. And also note that the phrase, when the oppressor is no more, when, the word when is key in Hebrew. Okay? Key can be temporal marker like when, but it also is often used as surely or truly. Okay, surely or truly. So truly or surely the oppressor is no more. Surely the time will come when the oppressor is no more. Okay? So this is the response of Judah to the Moabite messenger. But what does Moabite messenger, or what does Moabite king and the Moabite nation do? Verse 6. We have heard of the pride of Moab, how proud he is. Of his arrogance, his pride, and his insolence. In his idle boasting, he is not right. Moab refuses the offer of shelter in Zion. Okay? And verse 7. Therefore let Moab wail for Moab. Wail for Moab, let everyone wail. Mourn utterly stricken for the raisin cakes of Kir Hareshet. The raisin cake of Kir Hareshet is a special export product of Moab. Okay? Which they're no longer doing because of the war. So this offer of security in Zion is offered to the Moabites under the Davidic dynasty. But Moab apparently has turned the offer down. If I quote a well-said commentator, it says, their unchanged plight, there is Moabite, their unchanged plight means that they refused what was offered. The entry fee was too high, for they could only enjoy Zion's security at the price of owning Zion's king. If they had been asked for money, their pride would have been left intact. But to submit to Zion's king was tantamount to admitting that only he could save them. So that's why we have this condemnation of Moabite pride and the ultimatum in verse 7. Therefore, let Moab wail for Moab. Okay? This is how I understand it. Another way of understanding it, if I just briefly, quickly say, is that 4b and 5 are all words of the messenger starting from verse 3. In fact, my ESV has a quotation mark start at verse 3 and end at verse 5, but we know that there are no quotation marks in the Hebrew language. Okay, so these quotation marks are just added by these modern day translators. But I disagree, and many people disagree with this quotation mark. But people who do put the quotation mark from verse 3 to 5 are saying, when the oppressor is no more, then a throne will be established in steadfast love. These are the words of the messengers who say, hey, please help us, please take us as refugees. When the oppressor is no more, then a throne will be established in steadfast love. This steadfast love part is flattery. Okay, they're flattering to Hezekiah. They're saying, "Oh, King Hezekiah, when all this is gone, may your throne be established forever." Kind of like, so they're flattering to King Hezekiah to earn his favor. Okay, some other people say it's they're sharing the same hope as the Israelites. Moabites have the same hope of future restoration of Israel as Judahites do with the coming messianic king and so on. But the problem is, verse 6 says, "We have heard of the pride of Moab." The verse right after that is condemnation of Moab's pride. So if the Moabite messengers were really saying that, "Oh, we are waiting for the Davidic king to come, so can we find refuge in your kingdom?" It does not match as the prideful description that we see in verse 6. That's why I see verse 4b and 5 as a response by Judah. Here, you can be with us under this Davidic king that we're waiting for, and this destruction will come to an end, but we have heard of the pride of Moab, meaning they turned down the offer, and verse 7 is the ultimatum. All right, moving on. Verse 8. "For the fields of Heshbon languish, and the vine of Sibmah. The lords of the nations have struck down its branches, which reached to Jazer and strayed to the desert. Its shoots spread abroad and passed over the sea." Okay, this is Moab's grief explained. If you look at the outline, this is the counterpart to B. This B prime, Moab's grief explained. Let's move on to part C prime, verse 9. "Therefore I weep with the weeping of Jazer for the vine of Sibmah. I drench you with my tears, O Heshbon and Elealeh, for over your summer fruit and your harvest the shout has ceased. And joy and gladness are taken away from the fruitful field, and in the vineyards no songs are sung, no cheers are raised, no treader treads out wine in the presses. I have put an end to the shouting. Therefore my inner part moans like a lyre for Moab, and my inmost self for Kir Hareshet." One more verse. "And when Moab presents himself, when he wearies himself on the high place, when he comes to his sanctuary to pray, he will not prevail." Verse 9 is amazing. Once again, we have this first person grief. "Therefore I weep with the weeping of Jazer." Okay, remember in the previous chapter, we saw that Lord grieved over Moab, right? Chapter 15:5, "My heart cries out for Moab," in the context of the destruction they're facing. Okay, here once again, God says, "I weep with the weeping of Jazer." Okay, God is weeping once again when Moab walked away from God's offer of salvation. Okay, God wept in his inner parts. When we choose wrong, God doesn't rejoice in seeing us suffer under sin. He wants to see his creation flourish. But the way to flourish, there is only one way, and that is through God's determined way, Jesus. But of course, in this context, there was no Jesus, but it's Zion, right? But sadly, Moab turned down the offer, turned away from it, and hence God is weeping and grieving over Moab. Okay? Let's wrap up. Verse 13. "This is the word that the Lord spoke concerning Moab in the past, but now the Lord has spoken, saying," pause. Don't miss these formulaic sayings. Okay, this is the word that the Lord spoke concerning Moab in the past, but now the Lord has spoken, saying. Okay, so there must have been two incidences that Isaiah received an oracle from the Lord concerning Moab. And the part that we have been reading starting from 15 and until now was what was given first. But now Isaiah received a second oracle, seems like. And God is giving Isaiah more detail about the destruction of Moab. And verse 14. "In 3 years, like the years of a hired worker, the glory of Moab will be brought into contempt, in spite of all his great multitude, and those who remain will be very few. and feeble. Okay, so in this second oracle, we see that God gave an additional detail, aka in 3 years. So God gave him a timeline. In 3 years, Moab's gonna be destroyed. Okay, so let's look at the structure again. Chapter 15 is Moab's certain ruin. Follow along with me in your Bible if you can. Because Hour of Moab is laid waste, and and then we have Moab's grief expressed because of all these terrible things. They're wearing sackcloth and so on. And verse 5, we have the Lord's grief of Moab, 15:5. And my heart cries out for Moab because of this destruction that's coming. Turn to chapter 16. Send the lamb. We have shift of scene from Moab and God's grieving to Selah, from where the Moabites are sending messengers to the Judahite king asking for shelter. And verse 14b and 5 is the offer of shelter in Zion under the reign of the Davidic king, which the Moabites refuse. Okay, Moabites' refusal for shelter in D prime. And in B prime, we have Moab's grief explained once again, like we had in chapter 15. And we once again had the Lord's grief over Moab in 16:9. Therefore, I weep with the weeping of Jazer. And the chapter wraps up with Moab's imminent ruin. In 3 years, Moab's going to be destroyed. Just like how the oracle began in 15:1 concerning Moab's certain ruin. Let me just tell you that the pinnacle of the structure corrects any impression that the hope expressed in the Davidic promises is exclusivistic. What I mean by that? The hope, the salvation that is offered through Israel, through Zion, is not only for Israel. Okay? This is not a New Testament invention that all the Gentiles get saved. Ever since the Old Testament, okay? Ever since Abraham, all nations are supposed to be blessed through God's redemptive plan, through Jesus when he comes, but at this time, through Israel. Okay? That's why Israel lies in the center of judgment and blessing. Okay? That's the pinnacle of it. So we also must remember 2 things. God weeps when we walk away from him. Okay? Turn away from sin and let us go back to him. Secondly, there's only one way of returning to him. There is a set way of having fellowship in the true blessing of God, and that is through Israel and Jesus, his son. Amen.